Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thorough Newspaper Analysis, which is brought to you by Losico. So, today we have a lot of articles to be discussed. Basically, we have four articles. Two are from the Hindu, and the other two are from the Indian Express. The first article, Dams and Damages. So, this is definitely in context with the latest glacial outburst that has taken place, due to which a severe flood has been caused in the Chamoli district of Uttarakhand. So basically, how the dams have been deteriorated, and how an increased burden has been seen on dams, and how they have also further caused flooding in the Himalayan region, has been discussed in this article. The second one, again, it talks about a topic that we have somehow discussed in our previous sessions also, which is POXO doesn't brew dilution. So this draws the analysis, and this draws a comparison between the provisions of POXO and IPC, and the very purpose why POXO was actually brought into news. And thirdly, we have citizen versus citizen. So this basically talks about the new bill, the new enactment that is going to take place in Jammu and Kashmir. So what is it about, and how is it actually not very, a good idea to give a certain power to the citizens? So what is that power, and why at all it is not good to give it to the citizens outrightly, has been discussed in this article. And fourthly, Parliament's homework, which is again from the Indian Express. So this talks about the basic process which takes place while an ordinary bill is passed in the Parliament. So what is it? We'll be seeing in this article. So if you're also preparing for Judicial Services examination, you can have a look at the Lord of the Courses, which is the Judiciary Test Prep course from Losico. The link to this course is available in the description box below, and from the landing page, you can download free study material for your own help as well. Also, you can have a look at our other courses for CLAT, All India Bar Exam, SEBI, etc. They are also very amazingly drafted courses. With this, let's see that what is the multiple choice question from yesterday's discussion. Which among the following country unilaterally pulled out of a 2019 agreement for developing the strategic East Container Terminal at the Colombo port? Your options are India, Japan, Sri Lanka, or both India and Japan. You can write down your answer in the comment section below. This is the descriptive question for the day. Identify the key objectives of the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, which is the POXO Act 2012. So the first topic which we'll be discussing is dams in the fragile region. So as we just discussed, why at all are we discussing the dams and their condition being in a fragile one is due to the glacial burst and the flood in Chamoli, Uttarakhand. One thing that we need to understand here is that the recent, the flood that took place in the Dhauli Ganga river in Uttarakhand. So the very reason of this outburst has not been really ascertained till date, though many say that this was due to an avalanche, or this was due to some kind of, erratic increase in the water flow. So some are claiming it to be a natural reason, while others, as in this article, are claiming it to be man-made reasons due to the increased number of dams that are being built in the area. So that is why the authorities are still, they're researching into the matter. Thus, we cannot conclusively say that what was the actual cause of this outburst or of this flood that has taken place. But here, if we consider the dams that are being built in this area, let's understand what is the prevailing situation. So Uttarakhand High Court in 2019 order said that it questioned the use of explosives on the Rishiganga site for illegal mining in the name of dam construction. Now, as we know that illegal mining also is a big problem when it comes to areas that are close to dam construction, because many a times the authorities or the other people, they take the lease in the name of construction of dam, but ultimately the activity that they are doing over there is of illegal mining. And for that purpose, as we know, that dynamites and other kinds of explosives are used to burst out the mountains and to dig in great and deep cracks into the the land. That is why Uttarakhand High Court in 2019 order actually questioned the use of explosives in the Rishiganga site. See, basically what happens is, whenever you are trying to put in any kind of huge explosives or dynamites for the purpose of bursting the mountains, so it is not that particular area of the mountain which gets affected or which gets the huge vibrations. Rather, these vibrations travel to a long distance. And specifically, if we are talking about the mountainous area, then there are a lot of structures, especially if we talk in this situation, like a lot of dams that are situated in these mountain areas because of for the hydroelectric generation of the of the power. Now, in such a scenario, these vibrations can be very, very detrimental to the stability and to the strength with which these constructed dams hold the ground. And that is why the use of these explosives can ultimately make these dams and their construction weak, which can, in the long run, make them fall down or just break down. And that is why it can become detrimental, as we can see maybe in the case as well, this one too. Now here, one important committee which we have, it is the Chopra Committee report, which was given in 2014, the report of which came in 2014. So it was headed by an environmentalist, Ravi Chopra, and 10 other members. And the very task that they were allotted in this area was to suggest that what is the impact of dams in causing of floods in the Himalayan region. And we have been, every now and then we have been discussing about the dams and the overaging dams in the Himalayan region, and how this has become, in the long run, within the coming 20-30 years, most of the dams, approximately 80% to 90% of the dams will become overaged, and they will be on the verge of, breaking down and causing a lot of floods. So the Chopra Committee report suggested that 23 out of 24. Now, can you understand the gravity of the problem that is existing over here? That 23 out of 24 proposed dam projects be cancelled for their potential damage that they can cause in the coming future. And this is still pending in the Supreme Court. You can see that this was in 2014. It has already been more than 6 years now. And this entire plea, this entire contention is still pending in the Supreme Court. And thus, we should understand the gravity of this, because see, another reason that we'll understand will be regarding the seismic activity that is possible in this zone. Then the next thing that we can talk about is the impact of climate change. Now, how climate change has made this problem even severe one. So as we know that due to the climate change, the global temperature is rising, due to which the glaciers, the ice and the snow in the Himalayan region as well is melting at a very rapid rate, due to which the water, which earlier had to be in smaller quantities, is now more and more in the downward side of the hills, due to which more pressure is increased on the dams, and thus a higher chance exists for any kind of flooding. Also, along with this, a lot of sedimentation also takes place. Now, what happens is, as we know, that when a river flows, it is not that it only takes away water with it. There are thousands and thousands kinds of sediments that it takes along. It can be, a big size pebbles, small pebbles as well. Then we have, sand particles. We have very minute sand particles, then very, very, very minute rock particles as well. So there are a lot of sediments also which move and get carried along with the water of the river. What happens is that now when this river water in huge lump sum quantity reaches the dams, so there is a huge quantity of these sediments also which gets settled down in the dams. So as you remember, only a few days back when we were talking about the problem of siltation and sedimentation in the Himalayan dams or the Himalayan region dams, we discussed like that, for example, this was the building of a dam. So here the water is collected, but already there is a lot of sedimentation that has taken place, due to which, firstly, the capacity of water holding of that particular dam will decrease. And secondly, the pressure against the walls of that dam will further increase, because now there are a lot of sediments that are accumulated at the back of the dam. So due to the climate change, the Himalayan glaciers are receding and disintegrating at a very fast rate. And it has also increased the number of glacial lakes. So as we know, the glacial lakes are simply whenever these lakes are formed by the water that melts from the glaciers and gets accumulated in a kind of, any small valley, or it gets guarded by moraines, which we just discussed yesterday. If you want to talk, get a cue about it, so you can definitely have a look at just yesterday's newspaper analysis. And finally, one thing that we have to be very specific about when we're talking about the Uttarakhand and the problems of dams and construction activities in Uttarakhand is that we have a severe threat of earthquakes. So Uttarakhand lies in the seismic zone 4, which is of severe intensity, and seismic zone 5, which is very severe intensity. Now, this area you can see. So this part of this is Uttarakhand state. As you can see, this area is in zone 5, and this entire area over here is in zone 4. So anywhere you move in Uttarakhand, you are still in the zone 4. So the least safe you can be is to be in the zone 4. So most of these dams are constructed in zone 5 and zone 4. As we know, the areas are very highly seismic in their activity. Seismic means that they have high tectonic plates in our previous slides. So we had talked about the plates as well in some a few months back in our discussion. So basically, this is the Indian plate. We have various tectonic plates on in our Earth. So this is the Indian plate, and this is exactly the area where Indian plates joins the Eurasian plate. So what happens is that this area got collided. So here, it got collided with the. It gets frequently it gets collided with the Eurasian plate, due to which a lot of tremors and vibrations are caused in this area, and that is why this area, this entire region over here, is in high seismic zone. Then we have other issues also, like deforestation, which further increases the the erosion of the land, and thus further increases the sedimentation level in the water. And then dumping of construction material into rivers rather than separate lands. So we also know that even the solid waste materials are dumped into the rivers, due to which the water holding capacity of that river decreases, and thus the chances of causing flood in that particular river increases. Now, the next discussion is about the POCSO. We have already discussed it, so we'll take it in a short basis. So recently, Bombay High Court in Satish Ragde versus State of Maharashtra acquitted the accused under POCSO on grounds that there was no skin to skin contact. So yes, obviously this judgment has been into a lot of discussion these days. So there has been a basically what they're doing is they're acquitting the Bombay High Court in various other cases also recently. It acquitted the accused in the under the POCSO, but then they also convicted the person under the provisions of IPC. So that is why we need to draw a comparison between the similar provisions between IPC and POCSO. So if we talk about the definitions, in IPC for assault or criminal, but under IPC it is very generic in nature. Then if we talk about the punishment, so there is higher punishment under POCSO to provide more deterrent effects as compared to the IPC. As we know that there is a provision of minimum 1 year imprisonment that has to be given to a person if he is accused under section 7, that is section 8 for POCSO, and section 8 provides minimum 3 years for sexual assault, while section 354 of IPC provides only for minimum 1 year for outraging the modesty of a woman. But in the case of Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan, in 1997, the Supreme Court said that offense relating to modesty of the woman cannot be treated as trivial, and that was the very reason that in the later stages, POCSO in 2012 had been brought up, that if at all these sexual offenses take place against a child, that is a child that is under the age of 18 years, then it should be taken up more severely. So this was the object behind the POCSO Act. The sexual offences against children were neither specifically provided in existing laws nor adequately penalized. And that is why we needed to have a specialized provision, a specialized act that aimed at deterring the sexual offences specifically against children. Secondly, to implement UN Convention on the Rights of Children, which was ratified by India in 1992. And thirdly, to protect children aged less than 18 years from sexual assault. So that was the very purpose of POCSO, and that is why it is very much desirable and expected out of the courts of law that they keep the sanctity of the very essence and the very purpose for which POCSO was brought into force, and not just to keep on replacing and substituting the provisions with the provisions of IPC. So the next article talks about anti-national online content. Union Home Ministry, through a new program, has invited citizens to police online content. So basically, here the Ministry of Home Ministry has given this idea that now the citizens would be responsible, that they actually take care of any online content that is prevailing and which is anti-national in nature, and it would be now open to them to report such things to the authorities. So this will be piloted in J&K and Tripura, asking volunteers to report offenses like child sexual abuse, rape, terrorism, radicalism, and anti-national activities. But the very problem with this idea is, though at one side we can see that yes, maybe this idea will be able to inculcate a more sense of responsibility amongst the citizens. It might able to bring in a sense of courage amongst them to report certain things. It might also make them aware about the various offenses and take a stand against it. Also, it might increase the base of policing over there, but there are some severe and some very to be taken seriously problems which are associated with this scheme. Firstly, existing legal framework does not define what constitutes anti-national activity. Now, this is very, very subjective. For example, our constitution, we have the very provision in the constitution as well in our fundamental duties, as well as we have entire act for that we need to respect our national flag, national anthem, and all the things for national sovereignty and integrity. But The Supreme Court also mentions that it is not compulsory to sing along the national anthem. But it may be okay for me, but for the other person, it might constitute to be anti-national. So now what is anti-national for whom is a very big and subjective question. So what not might not be anti-national for me might be severely anti-national for you. That is why this ambiguity can be very severely misunderstood, and that is why it can be misused into various prospects. So that is why the existing legal framework should firstly, it should make a clear justification and clear explanation as to which kinds of activities would amount to be anti-national. Secondly, no statutory backing exists for such a volunteer force, nor clear what need it might serve. So there is basically no statutory roles that are provided by the volunteers. There is no particular ambit under which these volunteers have to function. And thus this can be taken up to be very arbitrary in nature, and then there can be a severe abuse of power that can take place. Thirdly, the ministry cannot outsource a fundamental state responsibility to counter cyber crime. Now, what happens is that there are a lot of things which we call as the sovereign functions. So basically by sovereign functions, we mean that there are certain functions that can be taken up only by the government or only by the departments or authorities or the agencies of the government. These sovereign functions cannot be outsourced or delegated to any other individual or any other kind of agency which is private in nature. For example, police itself is a sovereign function. Army, the defense of the country, the foreign, the treaties, the covenants that India participates in. These are all sovereign functions. The national security itself is a sovereign function. So in this regard, it is not really feasible to outsource this fundamental duty to any other person, to to anybody who is an individual or a private agency. So that is why, as we know, that the fundamental rights are also not absolute in nature, but still the reasonable restrictions also have to be reasonable. So that is why this fundamental state responsibility cannot be outsourced to any person or any individual being. Then fourthly, it makes citizens vulnerable to such unofficial surveillance and scrutiny. Now here, when we are talking about exactly the same thing, that when we are here, we have freedom of speech and expression, we have a right to privacy. So here, official surveillance and scrutiny, when it comes to the importance of the sovereignty of the country, the national security, then it is very much acceptable. But when it is unofficial in nature and it is 24/7 above our heads, so definitely it is not acceptable, and thus this is completely a violation of the fundamental rights of the other citizens. Fifthly, risks deepening polarization and mistrust in the society. So definitely it can be many a times it can be given a regional or a communal color, because two communities or two different castes can actually play the blame game and can hamper the situation for each other, and can actually they can put the other community into question by raising any kinds of doubts or something which are not really reasonable, but since now they enjoy this power to do so, so they can definitely misuse it. And sixth one is that it ignores the Supreme Court guidelines, which it talks about criminalizing the online speech. So here we have to, we have been discussing a lot about the hate speech as well. So we should be bringing out some, legal provisions as well. Though we have a lot of provisions in the IPC as well for the, the prohibition, putting prohibition and ban on the hate speeches, but still it exists, and that is why it actually ignores the Supreme Court's guidelines, and it is giving the power to every other individual who has a very high potential to misuse this given power. Then in the case of Shreya Singhal versus Union of India in 2013, the Supreme Court ruled down Section 66A of the IT Act 2000 and ruled that a distinction must be made between speech that is simply offensive or annoying and that which is guilty of inciting a disruption of public order or violence. Though both the things should not be, encouraged, but still there is a difference between a speech that can simply, offend somebody, or can just, annoy somebody, or can, irritate somebody. But there is a difference between this and the other kind of speech which actually has the potential of inciting a disruption or causing any kind of uprooting sentiment in the public order, or it can cause violence. Then finally, we have the bill scrutiny in Parliament. So recently, the Supreme Court stayed the implementation of the three controversial farm laws. So here it talks about that how a bill is scrutinized in the Parliament during its passage takes place in both the houses of the Parliament. So three mechanisms are there to examine whether a bill adheres to the constitutional principles or not. Firstly, any member can oppose the introduction of a bill citing legislative incompetence. Now, this is an important part, that any member, so it doesn't really have to be a minister, even a private member. So how do we differentiate between a private member and a minister? Basically, is a minister is a person who holds some kind of portfolio, who is directly connected to some kind of ministry, who takes some particular efficient function. But the private member is that who takes party or participates into all the other like voting and introduction of the bill and other kinds of things in the parliament, but who does not hold a particular portfolio for the time being. So here, any member, now be it a minister or be it the private member, can oppose the introduction of a bill citing legislative incompetence. So if that particular person or that particular member believes that there is some legislative incompetence attached with that bill, so he can oppose the introduction of that particular bill in the very first instance. Secondly, examination by parliamentary committee. Now, as we know that once the bill goes for the first reading, after that it moves, generally it moves for the further scrutiny in the parliamentary committees. So it has the advantage of drawing constitutional experts outside the law ministry. What happens is that parliamentary committees are experts in their particular fields, and that is why they can scrutinize on the merits of that particular bill. So it can be done for the examination. The bill needs to be referred by the ministers. So here, if at all you want that particular bill to be examined by the parliamentary committee, so the ministers over there in that particular house will have to refer that particular bill to that parliamentary committee. And the government puts the bill through legal vetting and interministerial consultations. So then at the final stage, when the parliamentary committee has also thought about it, it has maybe it can suggest some kind of recommendations or changes to be brought in there. Then finally, legal vetting is done and interministerial consultations are done, which means that various ministries that are associated with that particular bill, they come and sit to a consultation and they decide what would be the proper way of implementing that particular bill. So you can go through this, like introduction in either house of the parliament takes place, then it is referred to a standing committee, then it is introduced for consideration and passing, then clause by clause discussion and amendments are taken place, and the voting takes place on them. Then the voting on the entire bill as a whole is done. Then clause by clause vote and final vote in the other house. Same process is taken up then in the other house. Then it goes to the president under Article 111. As we know, it goes to the president for his assent. Then if he gives his assent, then it is given in the it is actually published in the Gazette Notification of India, and finally the rules are framed for the proper implementation of that bill. Then here are the parliamentary committees. There are actually 4 kinds of parliamentary committee. First are the parliamentary financial committees. So basically it is the Public Account Committee, then we have the Estimates Committee, and then we have the Public Sector Undertakings Committee on the Public Sector Undertakings. Then we have the standing committees, for example, Committee on Railways, Health, etc. Then we have ad hoc or select committees, like for example, Select Committee on GST, that are for a particular purpose, and then they actually are are brought in only for a particular discussion to take place. And fourthly, we have the administrative committees like the Business Advisory Committee, Rules, Privileges, etc. So these were all there. We have already discussed these things in the previous sessions. That is why we are not taking it to a very a lengthy discussion this time. So this was all for the day. We hope it was a good session for you. Thank you so much for staying tuned with LawSikho. If in case you wish to download the PDF for today's slides, you can join a Telegram group. The link to our Telegram group is available in the description box below. You can also visit our official website for any other information. Thank you so much.